Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about Old Dads. So I know this movie came out last year. Most people have probably seen it at this point, especially if you have Netflix. I finally just got around to watching it. And I have some thoughts. I should preface this review by saying that I am a fan of Bill Burr. I absolutely love Bill Burr. He's one of my favorite stand-up comedians of all time. I just think there's an honesty to him. There's an edge to him, but there's also a great relatability to how he views the world and society. And he's almost effortlessly funny. You know what I mean? And so I went into this movie with reasonably good high expectations. Not the highest, because I know that the movie got pretty negative reviews from the critics. But if you look on Rotten Tomatoes, it's got a pretty high audience rating, but very low critical rating. And I kind of chalked that up to a lot of people saying, oh, that this movie is not very politically correct. And so there were a lot of people, a lot of professional critics that, attacked the movie for that. And, you see that kind of thing all the time. So I'm like, it's probably not that bad. I really did not like this movie, and I didn't expect to dislike it as much as I did. It's going to be... I literally just got done watching this movie, so forgive me if I come off as a rambling mess here, because I'm still trying to collect my thoughts on it. But outside of the fact that the movie just wasn't very funny, none of the performances were particularly great. The chemistry between our three leads felt very off and just not very good. But I think what the message of this movie is trying to say is what left me feeling the most puzzled. And before I get too deep into it, I'll just give a brief overview for the plot for those who may not have seen this movie yet. So Old Dads revolves around three friends, Jack, Connor, and Mike. Jack is played by Bill Burr, and the other friends are played by Bobby Cannavale and Bokeem Woodbine. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing those names. So there are these three buddies that have a business where they do throwback sports jerseys, and then they sell off that business to millennials. There's a vast majority of the jokes around Old Dads are based on generational differences, particularly of Gen X against millennials, because Bill Burr is Gen X. And then the other big part of a lot of the comedic stuff revolve around the political landscape of today and how much it's changed drastically since Bill Burr was a young man, or a teenager, if you will. And I expected a lot of the movie to center around that comedy, because a lot of Bill Burr's comedy is about that type of stuff. And he kind of points out the things that doesn't really make sense to him versus when he was a kid. And then he'll do the opposite, where he'll point out the crazy things that his generation did that was probably never okay to begin with, but it was just kind of accepted back then. And there's a lot of great humor in that. But all of the humor in this movie, it felt very forced. It felt very scripted in a way where it's like the comedy didn't come off as natural as it should. And every single punchline in this movie could be seen coming from miles away. And I think one of the biggest unwritten rules in comedy is the more surprising the punchline, the funnier it is. So if our characters say something unexpected, it lands better. But if you can see the joke coming, it just doesn't really work that well. And I don't want to come off like I didn't laugh at all during this movie. There is a couple of decent chuckles, but I can honestly say I never fully laughed out loud, belly laugh, like I do with a lot of Bill Burr's specials. And I think that was incredibly disappointing. So yeah, so there's that aspect of it. And then what's really confusing about the movie is that all three of our male characters, well, specifically Bill Burr's character, much like the real life Bill Burr, has anger problems. But in the movie, every time his character gets angry about something, it's always revolved around something that's yeah, you should get angry about that. For example, there's a scene in this movie where he's being reprimanded by a teacher for being late picking up his kid. And he was only 2 minutes late because there wasn't parking spaces available. And then the teacher is trying to give him shit. and say, no, that's not good enough. You need to pay a fee and all this stuff. And like Bill Burr's like, okay, I'll take out my wallet. And he's like actually going to pay her before he gets mad. And I was like, what? And then of course he freaks out, calls her the C word, and then he has to do a whole apology to her. And there's so many situations in this movie where his character in particular, he's getting upset over very reasonable things that I think a lot of people would get pissed off about. And then his character is treated badly for getting upset about stuff. Now, granted, should he have called the woman the C word? I mean, probably not. But him standing up for himself and pointing out like, hey, don't lecture me about being 2 minutes late. That's ridiculous. And I'm not going to pay a fine to pick up my own kid. Like, where do you get off? That's not cool. Yeah, that's something you should get mad about. And it's like his character is treated as being like an unreasonable hothead. And it's like, there's no indication in the movie that he's that unreasonable of a person. So I felt very conflicted. I'm like, am I supposed to think that he's being an asshole? Because everything he's getting mad about, I would get mad about. And then to get into more spoiler territories, the movie kind of ends with him realizing or coming to terms with his wife being upset that he can't control his anger over stuff. And all of the women in this movie, and this is the other thing that's confusing about this film, because Bill Burr wrote this movie, so he intentionally wrote all the women to be incredibly insufferable in this film. There is no likable female character in this movie. They all come off as incredibly smug and holier than thou, and they're just thoroughly unlikable, including his wife. There's a whole conflicting thing in terms of how am I supposed to see these characters? And then the movie ends with him basically becoming like a neutered dog, if you will, where it's like he doesn't stand up for himself anymore, and then when people are judging him and they go away, he just turns his back to him and calls him a fucking asshole anyway. So I guess his character didn't really learn anything. What is this movie trying to say? So I was trying to look up reviews to this movie. I was curious if other people felt similar to how I felt, not in terms of like, oh, this movie makes fun of the left and that offends me because I'm on the left. I'm not. I'm speaking. I've seen reviews, people trying to attack this movie from a political standpoint, but I wanted to see if there were reviews from people who were fans of Bill Burr's material, such as myself, but also didn't connect with the movie. And there's one IMDb review that I'm going to post on the screen here. I'm going to read it from my phone. That kind of perfectly encapsulates how I felt about this movie and why it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It had some funny moments, but I found myself being more frustrated than anything. I guess the emasculation of men is supposed to be funny. The men do nothing wrong and the women are absolutely insufferable. But everything is the man's fault. I can't believe this wasn't written by a woman. I feel like this movie missed an opportunity to make a real statement by going in the direction they chose. In the end, the only statement made is that men are terrible and it's acceptable to treat them as such. Outside of those issues, I feel like it was a well-made movie. The acting was good. In particular, Bobby Cannavale, who I usually do not care for. So I agree with 99% of that review, except for the end thing he said about that actor. I thought he was annoying in this movie. Yeah, that is kind of what this movie, that's kind of what I got out of this movie. It does treat its male characters like they shouldn't stand up for themselves. And I'm not saying there are other scenes in this movie revolving around the other characters outside of Bill Burr, his two friends, where they do behave pretty like inappropriately or whatever, but I'm mainly focusing on Bill's character because he takes the majority of the screen time, and he's meant to be kind of the everyman, the representation of an older guy and a younger generation. But I'm of a younger generation. I am a millennial, and I agree with a lot of Bill Burr's complaints in this movie, but the movie ends with him like, I don't know, just basically not being able to stand up for himself. But of course, that comes off as kind of a strange message because Bill Burr is a stand-up comedian. He makes a living of being able to say whatever he wants, and that's why so many people love his comedy, because it makes them like, yeah, I agree about what a lot of the stuff he's saying. One of the best Bill Burr routines I've ever heard in my life is Bill Burr talking about gold diggers and how gold diggers are female equivalent of women beating men, you know, but in like a psychological or, you know, financial standpoint. And so he points out the hypocrisies in society, and the way this movie ends, it's almost like he's criticizing his own view of the world, like he shouldn't be seeing things like this, but it's like, no, you see things from a reasonable point of view. And I think that's why you have such a large fan base and why so many people identify with your comedies, because you point out a lot of the insane things in our society that's just kind of accepted that shouldn't be accepted. And yet this movie ends with him accepting all of those things. So it's just conflicting. And on top of that, it's not that funny. It's kind of boring. It definitely goes on for like at least 15 minutes longer than it needs to. It has these horrible moments of forced sentimentality that just feels completely phony and bullshit. This is a bad movie. Old Dads is a bad movie. And I'm saying this as a Bill Burr fan. I certainly don't want him to not make any more movies. I would love him to make a movie that I would enjoy. And I'm glad that I'm not the only one who is a fan of Bill Burr's that just didn't connect with this movie, because I really wanted to, because I really do love Bill Burr's comedy. But yeah, this one did not really hit for me. So I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. For anyone watching this, I'd assume most of you are Bill Burr fans. Let me know. Do you think I'm kind of viewing this movie? Did you also not like the movie, but you're also a fan of Bill Burr's comedy? List it in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching.